Our next presentation, David and Manish are going to cover issues in contracts and legal. I think it's a great carry-on if you were here on the previous session talking about a lot of the contracts around external data, so I think we're going to take this a bit further. So with that, I'll turn it over, and I'll take the questions and help facilitate at the end of the presentation as well.
Thank you.
Oh, you have the lavalier, or you can use the podium.
Hi, everybody. Hear me okay? My voice usually projects pretty well. Hello, welcome, good afternoon. I'm here to get you guys really excited about the law. My name's David Adler. I'm a lawyer. I've been practicing for over 25 years. My interest in IT and software and those kind of things goes all the way back to high school. I had a math teacher who turned me on to HyperCard. And when I got to Indiana University in the early 90s, we got email. And I thought email was the most amazing thing because I could write notes back and forth to a buddy of mine who was at Yale, many states away. And when I got to law school, what was even more incredible was that I was given 3 megabytes of space on the law school's web server as a student. So this was 1994. All right, everybody's still dialing up, Prodigy, AOL, the dial-up internet services, and they were giving us free web space. So I actually took advantage of that. I learned everything I could about the web, HTML, learned a bit of Unix and some other software stuff. And by the time I graduated law school, I was actually selling web design services to lawyers. But I figured it would be more lucrative to use my law degree rather than what I'd taught myself. And in retrospect, I actually think I probably should have stayed in the web and design side of things because that really took off in the 2000s. And that's kind of where I set my sights. Late 90s, I started my own practice after working at a very large law firm doing M&A work. I realized I really enjoyed doing large-scale contracts, large-scale transactions, but I saw an opportunity in what was happening in Chicago and elsewhere with all of the business around e-commerce, all the software, all the online explosion, and that's where I wanted to be. And so that's really where I have been since 1999. Along the way, I've represented many clients, lots of small startups, software companies, design companies. I've worked with very large enterprises. I was in-house counsel for a company that was called Bacon's Information. It is now called Cision US. It's one of the largest, if not the largest, software and services providers to the PR industry throughout the world. And on a day-to-day basis, I was doing software license agreements with Fortune 500 companies. So dealing with a lot of the IT, a lot of the data type of issues that surround, licensing data, licensing software, using software, integrating it, all the issues that you probably deal with in your day-to-day job in terms of managing data, exploiting the data, commercializing the data. Couple quick things. Number one, I am a lawyer. I am not your lawyer. So this is not legal advice. This is just general information. Obviously, it's anecdotal. It's based on my experience. To the extent possible, I'll reference laws and cases that might be relevant. But you always need probably your own lawyer for specific advice on your situation and your contracts. I'm also not a graphic designer, so I've done my best with my PowerPoint. Hopefully, it doesn't bore you to death. It's really there as just kind of a prop. Most of the information comes from me. All right, now how do I switch to the next slide? Since I'm not familiar with these. The clicker. Thanks. Okay, I love this quote. It didn't go up. All right, so it's moving through here. It's just not up on the screen. I apologize for the technical difficulties. I don't know why this isn't playing. Yeah, the slide's there.
All right. Maybe we just...
Oh, it's up now. Okay, great. So I like this quote because it really summarizes what contracts are about. Whatever you negotiate needs to be in the contract. And I know when you're dealing with data, when you're dealing with IT services, right, these contracts can get very, very lengthy. That's not necessarily a bad thing. I know a lot of business people see lengthy contracts as a barrier to sale, but at the end of the day, it's really, it protects both sides of the relationship, and that's the way you have to approach it. Okay. No, this is weird. So today I'm going to kind of cover these 5 basic issues that I see come up most often when I'm, dealing with contracts, dealing, with data sovereignty and data management issues. Number 1, battle of the forms, right? I'm sure that comes up all the time. Our contract, their contract, whose contract? Second area I'm going to talk about is liability and cost traps. So kind of the big watch-outs in contracts that probably require a little bit more scrutiny by legal when they do come up. The third thing I'm going to talk about are some specific contract terms to think about when you're talking about data sovereignty, and I'll talk about some of the issues around, those terms and how they come up in contracts. The fourth thing I'm going to talk about today is IP ownership, intellectual property, copyright, trademark, trade secret, who owns rights in data, how do we share those rights, how do we work collaboratively, what are the risks and issues working with vendors, and customers as well. And then lastly, some specific thoughts around confidentiality, privacy, and security. One thing I did not mention is that as part of my practice, I've always been very involved in data privacy and security. Last year, I was the chairperson for the Illinois State Bar Association Information Privacy and Security Council, I think is what it's called, kind of an unwieldy name, but sort of our remit was to, educate lawyers on information security and privacy and those issues. So let's talk first of all about the battle of the forms, right? Every business faces this, whether it's with a customer or with a vendor. Whose paper are we going to use? Are we going to use our forms? Are we going to use their forms, right? And the issue that comes up in terms of data sovereignty is the two forms, the two different contracts may have gaps, right? My clients may address data sovereignty or data privacy differently than a vendor does or than a customer does. And sometimes, if you have gaps in contracts, it leads to sometimes a slowdown in negotiations, but there are different ways to address that. And so, a couple of things that I have, oh, you guys don't even have the slide here. This is so weird. I apologize. I just assumed that it went. It is Windows. Windows doesn't like me. I'm a Mac person.
Yeah, I think that's our problem. We both are.
So at any rate, the slide's coming up, right? One of the things that I do for my clients is when a contract comes in, let's say the vendor says, you have to use our contract. We're not using your contract. What I do is I line, more or less, in my mind, line the two contracts up side to side, and I try and figure out, okay, where are the gaps in the contract? Where is our coverage better than their coverage, or vice versa? Or do both contracts have an absence of language around key terms that we need? In that case, instead of rewriting the contract, you can just come up with something like a data security addendum or a data privacy addendum or some sort of a general set of rules that both parties can agree to that can just be appended onto a contract without having to rewrite the contract, right? And so that's another way of kind of simplifying this, the battle of forms and just getting data privacy and data sovereignty into that discussion as part of the negotiation. All right, trying this again. Hey, it worked. Okay. So liability and cost traps is kind of there's 3 key areas to talk about here. Number 1, laws, rules, and regulations. If you are dealing with GDPR at all, if you're dealing with international customers, you're probably familiar with the concept of data processor, data controller, some of these ideas, right? So if you're used to GDPR or having to deal with a customer that's subject to GDPR, you're already kind of thinking about some of these terms, right? In the US, we have a much different framework for privacy. We've got kind of regulatory oversight in the form of the FTC. We have some other oversight in the financial industry. We've got some oversight in the healthcare industry. And more recently, we have, I think it's now up to 6, maybe 7, at least 6 state privacy laws: California, Colorado, Utah, Virginia, Connecticut. I can't remember the 6th one, but of all of those, okay, Utah, Colorado, Connecticut, and Virginia specifically adopt the same terminology as GDPR and require things like privacy impact assessments. So, you know, from just a state compliance standpoint, number one, this is totally new. You know, number two, you know, it needs to be in your contracts, because these state laws require that your contracts address data sovereignty and data privacy and data security. Not all of the laws have come online, although most of them have. And it's sort of evidence of the trend here in the United States, right? Is all, like, potentially 50 state laws governing data privacy. I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, it's my own personal opinion. I suspect there will be some sort of a national privacy law before we get 50 different state laws. But from a contracting standpoint, right, if you are in one of these jurisdictions, or you have a customer in this jurisdiction, or you have a vendor in this jurisdiction, you need to be thinking about what governing law does the contract have? How does that state's data privacy laws impact what we are doing in our relationship? You know, are we dealing with personally identifiable information? Is this, you know, healthcare information? Is this data that requires a heightened level of security, right? So those kinds of things are impacting contracts. I mentioned earlier sort of the battle of the forms, right? This is just, you know, it's a time sink when you're going back and forth and trying to figure out which form to use and you know, how to get the process completed. The third area, third parties, is a whole host of other types of issues. When we talk about third parties, you're talking about HR people who are potentially dealing with data from, you know, employees, prospective employees, departing employees. You have third-party vendors, you know, and depending on the enterprise, you could have vendors for all sorts of things. You could have vendors for marketing. You could have vendors for HR. You could have vendors for, you know, the back office systems, all of whom need to touch your data, potentially customer data, right? And in the scenario where, let's say you've hired an outside marketing firm to, you know, do some sort of project for your existing customers, right? So here you have an outside third party who you have to give access to, you know, your customer data, right? So, you know, that is a very large risk in terms of, you know, being able to understand what they could possibly do with that, what liability is there for you in terms of sharing that, what liability is there for you if they misuse that data, okay? So all of those things become part of the conversation. Again, thinking back to this idea of a data privacy addendum or something like that, if you have, you know, vendors and there's major gaps in their data privacy or data security, you can just add an addendum to something like that to kind of build up that part of the relationship without having to rewrite the whole contract. So now I'm going to shift gears and talk a little bit more specifically about individual areas of the contract, individual contract terms. Number one is definitions. So definitions are key to any contract because this is how we avoid ambiguity. We take certain terms for the contract and we say, for the purposes of this contract, this term has this meaning. Okay, and this is very important for things like data sovereignty, security, and privacy, because you're going to need to define what data falls under, you know, the various rights and responsibilities in the contract. You need to define what is personal information, protectable information, what is a trade secret, you know, what what other types of things do you want to have defined? What I find in my clients who have more sophisticated software platforms, they like to define the different software tools that are available and how they work and things like that, so that you can get pretty granular as to who owns what. In terms of data security and sovereignty, if you're not sure where to start, a great place to look are state laws, right? You can always look to your state laws. If your state has a definition of, type of information that might be considered personally identifiable information, like you can look to the California law. They have the most comprehensive definition of personally identifiable information. You could look to like the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act. So there are sources to go to get some of these definitions that you would need. Again, battle of the forms, right? Who's got the better terms? How do we manage data sovereignty terms? Sometimes, my clients will see something that is just more overkill than what they can, possibly even meet in terms of what the requirements are. So, you have to look at these carefully and also match up capabilities. Third-party risk, I talked about that a little bit earlier, right? Having definitions about who is a data processor, who is a data controller, who is a data subject, what rights do the parties have in terms of using that data, accessing that data, sharing that data, internal, external. I've seen contracts get into the weeds on, whether the data can be used for a test site, right, just for debugging purposes or something like that. So, if data needs to be removed from client premises or from your premises, right? And this is one of those areas where it's very, very helpful to work with, a vendor in the space. And I know Manish, who's speaking after me, his company offers a service that allows you to control who accesses what data, right? And so in an enterprise, we have a lot of different people who potentially have access to a lot of different data. They may not need access to all of that. They may not be allowed to have access to all of that. And so there's tools out there that can help reduce that risk and maintain legal compliance by technologically creating those safeguards to make sure only authorized personnel have access to certain types of data. And I'll let Manish talk about sort of the ins and outs of that after I'm done. Data processing, right? Who's doing the processing? Where is the processing being done? Who's controlling it? And then lastly, future-proofing, right? One of the biggest costs and just headaches of contracts is making sure that they're good, over a period of time. And what I find is a lot of my clients fail to build in a mechanism to allow for amendments to a contract, whether it's something as simple as pricing terms or something more complex like services terms or even scope of liability. So you need a mechanism to be able to amend the contracts, but you also need to think forward and think about, should certain things be revisited? If it's a long-term contract, should we build in certain things at certain intervals during the relationship to make sure that everybody's on the same page? Am I doing on time? Okay, pretty good. So the fourth area I wanted to talk about very briefly is sort of IP ownership. And really here, I'm just going to kind of gloss over some key concepts. In today's world, IP is everywhere. Intellectual property is part of every business relationship. Data is interesting because data doesn't necessarily fall under traditional IP classifications. Like trademarks are brand names and logos and slogans, right? And everybody knows that copyright protects expressions of an idea. You can protect software code with a copyright. You can't protect a database with a copyright, but you might be able to protect aspects of data with the copyright. Really the best way to sort of protect data is either trying to treat it as a trade secret, meaning keeping it secret, and we don't have time today to go into what that involves, or just defining it as proprietary and confidential information within the scope of your relationship. Okay, so that you can build contractual protections around something even though it may not have traditional legal protection. And so some key concepts to have in a contract are things like work for hire and invention assignment agreements. Okay, so these are terms that will allow you to maintain ownership of things that are created for you. So if you have a vendor and the vendor is doing data processing and that is producing results, however those are formatted, okay, you want to make sure that the results and proceeds are all that are owned by you if you are paying them to do it for you. Another area that comes up often is the concept of a license or a reciprocal license, especially if you have vendors who are working closely with you to develop new products or analyze your data. They may want to have the right to exploit some of the intellectual property that they develop as part of that relationship. And the purpose of a reciprocal license is to allow both parties to sort of share their IP without giving up ownership of that IP. And typically the license terms will talk about what happens after the relationship ends. What are, to the extent we have created new IP through our collaboration, who owns that? Who can exploit that? How can it be used? How should it not be used, right? So all those kinds of terms need to be built in on the front end. The contract should also talk about, who can use the data, who can access the data. Can it be, where can it be used? Can it be shared with vendors? Can it, must it be kept on site? Can it be shared off site? Can it be shared in the cloud, okay? And all of these things should be triggering considerations around security. How secure are our systems? Do we have password authentication? Do we have two-factor authentication? Are we using encrypted networks? Are we using encrypted storage? I'm not saying that you have to use these things, right? But there are standards out there that say if you're going to handle sensitive information, then you need to meet certain standards. Again, kind of beyond the scope of this presentation, but those standards can be poured right into the contract. They can be adopted by reference. You could just say, we are adopting the NIST standard hyperlinked here. And those terms become part of the contract. I mentioned talking about what happens to the data after the parties end the relationship, right? So, who keeps what, who's allowed to do what after the relationship ends. Other key terms to think about. Audit rights. Audit rights are almost never included in a contract. I like to put them in there because it keeps people's feet to the fire. It gives one party the right to inspect the other party's whatever, right? Maybe it's, inspect your IT systems, inspect your data storage. I mean, you can imagine. Typically, I see audit rights around financial terms, but there's no reason that audit rights can't also address security audits and things of that nature. So lastly, I want to talk a little bit about confidentiality, data privacy, and security. All right? So this is kind of the new big area for everything, right? States, state governments, industry, everybody's kind of getting on this idea that it's no longer about just data. We're very concerned about consumer data in particular, personally identifiable information. So contracts need to have some pretty robust confidentiality terms. I see a lot of contracts that have very boilerplate confidentiality terms. The problem is it may not be a good fit for the business relationship. It may not have the escape hatches that you need to have because, in order for it to work, you need to make sure that you protect what can be protected, but each party has flexibility, to operate without worrying about being in breach of the contract. Integrity really goes to, the integrity of the data. How do we make sure that the data that we have is accurate, it's correct, it's complete, it hasn't been tampered with, it hasn't degraded. Availability, right? And this goes back to what I talked about before, making sure the right people have the right access to the right data. Making sure it's available to the people who need it when they need it, but not available to everybody. Other things to think about. Business continuity and disaster recovery. If you have a vendor who you are relying on to store or use or process a lot of your data, and it's sensitive data and it's important, you need to make sure that they're contractually obligated to hold up their end, make sure they're backing up and they are locking down and everything else that you would want done to protect your own data. Other things to consider in the contract are insurance, right? Making sure that there's some sort of cybersecurity insurance. I've seen contracts where they actually require certain policy limits or certain policy minimums for that type of insurance. This is, again, kind of a new area. And then, lastly, termination and expiration policies. So just the terms that govern what happens at the end of the relationship. I tried to save here a couple of minutes in case anybody had questions. I know I covered a lot of stuff really, really quickly. I originally thought I had about an hour to do the presentation, not 30 minutes. So I kind of condensed a lot of stuff. Hopefully it was helpful. I'd say the biggest takeaway that you should get is that your contracts need to have some kind of language around data sovereignty, consumer data, who controls it, who has access to it, and what to do if there's a breach or some other unauthorized access to that data. With that, I will sign off.
I'm going to go ahead and queue up Manesh, and then we'll take questions after that.
Okay.
I have like half a dozen questions because I've run across most everything you've run into, so I can completely relate to those. All right, let's see here. Now we just need to switch to the other one, I believe, if I do.
Yeah.
Oops. Maybe it's this one here. Nope.
Nope.
That's the previous one. All right, so now we get to find it, huh? You want to go ahead? I'll let you
I think
navigate.
I know where it is.
Is that
This
you?
one.
Go for it. That's
Wait,
great.
then how do you?
All right, just hit play. All right, with that, I'm going to hand it over to Manesh, who's the CEO and founder for Data Spark.
Where is
Oh, is it presenting yet? That's on the tab. Give it a try.
Is the other person open? Okay, I need to go to duplicate. Okay.
There we go.
and then
this
remove this. And then let me just. Yep.
All right,
Good.
Manesh has got a couple, 15 minutes here, and then we'll definitely stop to take some questions.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. So my friend David explained about how you can legally protect your data with the right access, right people, and right time. And then when you actually need to implement that, then we come into the picture. Our main focus is database management and security. So let me give you a little bit introduction about myself. I'm a CEO and founder of Data Spark. We are a San Diego-based company. So it's very interesting. People talk too much about data security and database security, but when it, actual time comes, we have seen there is not a lot of good effort, unless some regulators are after you or auditors after you. So most of our customers are in financial, healthcare, educational, and other domains where data security is extremely important. And then, I was talking with one of my potential customer, and they were saying auditors are after them. They need something where they can provision secure database access. And that's where exactly what we provide. So this is how the current, if you go to any companies, there are 300, 400 plus databases. And you have various teams, you have HR, you have business intelligence team, you have IT users, and everyone needs access to your database now. And then, out of those 400 databases, you have databases on-prem, cloud, and then, various kind of databases, SQL, NoSQL. So it's a mess, big mess. DBAs are all the time working like crazy, creating various grants, permissions, and it becomes really cumbersome to manage the whole holistic data access across all the platform, all the databases. And nowadays, I mean, I don't know if you guys are using databases, then you must know various tools like Toad or Beavers. So those are, as far as my understanding, kind of outdated client-server tools. We don't talk about those. We are DBHawk. We have a 360-degree view, and instead of walking or jumping, we fly. So, you have overall all understanding about your database, who is accessing what, and that's what exactly we provide. We call it, in a layman's term, zero trust database access. Nothing more, nothing less. You will get exactly what you need. That is the access we provide. Let's see. So this is, and then our platform includes everything in a single platform. So database security, data governance, data analytics, database management. So your total ROI on our tool, it makes a lot of sense. And that's how we were able to win a lot of big customers, including various banks, financial institutions, large corporations, and particularly in North America, and a lot of customers in European countries where regulators are after them. They can't give access to even their employee without complying with the various regulations, for example, GDPR or HIPAA or PCI. So for them, our product makes a lot of sense. So I'm not going to bore you with all the comparisons, but just to give you some idea, our tool is 100% browser-based, so you don't need to install anything on your machine. We have patented object access control policy built in, so you don't have to do anything within your database. You can create everything through our object access control policy. We have built-in charts, dashboard. We have SQL automation. So, for example, if you need to write some SQL jobs, then you can schedule a job and it will deliver results automatically. And on top of that, our product can be deployed on various Windows, Macintosh, Linux, any cloud, Google, AWS, Azure. It can run with Docker as well as Kubernetes. So, deployment is a piece of cake. So this is our overall architecture, and you can go more into details when you need more information. You can stop by at our booth or contact us. We can have a demo and then we can walk you through overall architecture. But the idea is at the bottom you have your databases, all kind of SQL, NoSQL, and we sit in middle layer where we give you access to your data, what you need based on various policies. Another thing is, usually when you are in the company, when you need an access, they will give you database username and password to log into the database. We don't do that. You log in through your SSO or Active Directory integration. So you don't know database username and password. You just log in through our application. You do your queries. And while you're doing that, we log all your activities. So we have every details about what exactly you are doing with the data, and that information you can feed into Splunk or any other technology. So these are, again, all the supported databases, then various advanced features. I will focus more on the security access where we support SSL, two-factor authentication, central server access. We have database activity logging and monitoring. Full object access control, that's our patented technology. Single sign-on integration, and then integration with SAML, LDAP. And then recently we added AWS Secret Manager integration, where even database administrator, they do not need to know the database username and password. It can get that through AWS Secret Manager. These are our milestones. So I built this solution for big financial institution in France. And I built this solution only for Oracle. And then, they came up and they said, can it work with MongoDB? Can it work with SQL Server? So basically, then we started building for other databases. And then throughout the years, we got selected as a database security vendor. And then in current year, we have our patent approval on, system and method for the discovery and, accessing, protecting your data. So that's what we are. And then we are AWS partner, Azure partner. We are very highly rated on G2 Crowd, so we have all authentic reviews, which gives you idea about how our company and our support is. I'll talk a little bit about the tool. Basically, you can do most of the things with the tool, and when you are supporting 500,000 users, you don't have to do a lot of manual work. We have support for the APIs, so you can do everything through APIs. And you can share data also through APIs. So, if you need to integrate with other tools, you can do that very easily. So that's what basically all-in-one kind of platform. I think that is it. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, let me know. And like I said, we are at the booth. Stop by. We can give you a quick demo. And if you're more interested, then we can schedule something and show you exactly how we are helping various organizations to protect their data. Thank you.
Great. Any questions from Manesh? I just had an aha moment with your stuff, so that's why I was curious. Yeah. So one of the things that I would just kind of highlight, a use case that I'm seeing most often in what we do, are really modernization efforts. As I see companies going from one database to re-platforming, maybe to Snowflake, to somewhere else in the cloud, you talk about virtualization or federation of databases, but there's this new category which has become kind of the distributed federation of security. And it's become this kind of layer because security policy management moving from one database to another is hard. I've heard that from different clients in banks, actually out of the UK. And they said when you move to a central place, then you can start to move your data assets behind the scenes there. You abstract security. And the real strength comes from your security policy management process. And it becomes less overburdened by the fact that you're having to do all of each individual databases and each individual users, and every database has a different system or approach or hierarchy for managing security. So it's kind of the use case that I see on the increase. So
yes.
I haven't heard of you guys, DBHawk, until this event. So.
Yes, that's what exactly we do. And it's
so
cumbersome to manage all the databases, and you will miss something, and DBAs are overworking.
In my world, I'm seeing everybody go from on-prem to Snowflake in one of the clouds or multi-cloud, and they're picking software like this in the security policy management space to help them with that multi-year migration.
Yes.
So no, this is great. And any questions for David? I kind of said let's hear from Manesh before that, but any questions or thoughts? We have a couple of minutes, maybe one or two, because I'm going to jump into mine if you guys don't have any. All right. So.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Manesh. So for David, real quick, gosh, it's interesting. You touched on everything that I've seen through contract negotiations with. So as an advisory firm with companies, helping them oversee consulting relationships, vendor relationships, I see a lot of this. So here's one of my first ones. You mentioned cybersecurity insurance and policy. I've been seeing that across all the contracts. It seems relatively new. So there's two parts. Nobody knows what the real limit should be. So they're throwing out 5 million, 10 million, these really high numbers that are hard for a lot of firms to hit. And then I also see the independent insurance carriers saying, it's really hard to find, and it's a very expensive, new type of insurance. What's your experience with that?
Yeah, all of the above. You're right. Number one, it's new. So, you know, insurers don't exactly know how to write policies to cover all of the risks because the risks are evolving. The coverage amounts are uncertain because nobody knows what the ultimate liability could be. And that is because liability comes from a number of different sources. It comes, you know, statutorily from some states. The GDPR has its own monetary penalty, which is quite, you know, it's 4% of global revenues. And then there's the plaintiffs' lawyers who bring class action lawsuits, right? So, you know, it's very hard to know what that liability is going to look like.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I'm seeing out there too, is it's very hard to, I think it's a maturity thing, right, as the industry learns. And then the second one I see is the security breach on the partners. Which is, and I experienced this, if you guys remember, I don't know how many years ago, 5 years ago, remember when Sony got hacked for all their emails in the movie industry? I was working in the entertainment industry at that time, and I watched that ripple through every, like, film business, 20th Century, Disney, Warner Brothers, and they locked everything down hard and started holding everybody accountable for this. So that is another one for these breach kind of things that's very hard for a lot of companies to work together to say they're going to prevent it. Now, one of the things I've seen as a requirement, I didn't see it on your list, was they're requiring the partners to document and show, I've been asked to do this as well, their own internal information security policies.
Yeah, I have seen that. And so when I was talking about security addenda to contracts, one of the addenda that I have seen as well has been a, you know, attach your information security policy, which sets forth how you handle your data, what you do in the event of a breach, all of those things. And I've had clients who've said to me, we don't have one of those. So, you know, we create one.
Yeah, what I can say is those boilerplate ones you talked about, I Googled and found them myself too. And just you then take them to your lawyers and like, let's start here and let's customize this for our case. And then the last, I think, question that I was going to ask about was in dealing with, like you were talking about the IP. Now, I do see a lot of consulting firms come into companies and work on projects together. And one of the things that consulting firms do, because I'm also seeing them at the next company saying, hey, we've got this cool engine product we've built. And I'm like, I wonder if your previous client knows that your collaboration's taken this IP, made it more of a generic engine, and selling it to your competitors in the industry now. And I've always wondered about that gray area about IP. I mean, have you seen that, especially with consulting firms?
Oh yeah, so I've got some great war stories. Early in my career, in the early days of the e-commerce, you couldn't buy off the shelf anything. There was no Etsy, there was no Amazon Web Services, so every e-commerce website was custom built. One of my early clients spent over $1 million having a custom e-commerce site built for their greeting card business, only to learn after it had gone live, the developer took that and sold it to their biggest competitor. And there was nothing they could do about it. And here's why. They never signed a contract with the software developer. They figured because their emails said, we're hiring you to make this for us, and we're paying you for it, and we're giving you all of the specifications everything has to do, that we own it. Doesn't work that way. The law says it is either created by an employee within the scope of their employment. In other words, it has to be part of their job duties. It can't just be something that they've done and you give them a paycheck. Or it has to be pursuant to a written work for hire agreement where it says, I am hiring you to create something for me that I will own. Those are the only two ways you own it. And oftentimes, you know, in your scenario, and it's something that I look for in my clients, is who owns what? You know, I need to know, what is each party bringing to the table? Is it expertise? Is it talent? Is it software? Is it data? Who's going to own it? When you create something new, who's going to own that? Okay? So those all need to be in the contract.
Yeah. No, that's great. So for a lot of you guys who are at companies doing projects, hiring consulting firms, that's why I mentioned that one, because across many companies I see that come up again and again. So All right, well, we're going to wrap up. We've got a break now, and then we're going to fire back up. So thank you so much, David, Manesh, for great presentations.
Thanks a lot.